Cooking steak isn't hard, but perfecting it can be, and it doesn't help that there are still a few falsehoods that, for some reason or another, people still hold true about their steaks. These are the myths everyone believes about cooking steak. One thing about eating steak that can really turn people off is the pinkish-red liquid that oozes out of them when they're really juicy. And yeah, sure, it really does look like blood. Heck, we even call a very rare steak bloody, and this alone can turn the stomach of a less than adventurous eater. But you won't find real blood in even the rarest of steaks. The liquid coming out of a cooked steak is actually called myoglobin, a protein found in animal tissue. Myoglobin serves to deliver oxygen to the muscles of an animal, and luckily for every steak lover out there, it has absolutely nothing to do with blood. The myoglobin in a steak will darken as it's cooked, which is why a rare steak looks a lot bloodier than a more well-done steak. All that juiciness is part of what makes a perfectly cooked steak so enjoyable, so embrace it. How many times have you heard celebrity chefs on television telling you to sear the meat in order to seal in its juices? Indeed, this seems to be one of the biggest cliches in modern cooking. But it's also a total myth, since that's not at all how searing works. The idea that searing the outside of meat somehow kept the juices inside of it was first propagated by a German chemist named Justus von Liebig in 1847. By the early 1900s, the concept had been scientifically debunked, but many people still believe it today.
That's embarrassing.
That said, searing meat is far from a useless endeavor. In fact, it's the best way to kick off something called the Maillard reaction. This is when the steak's amino acids and sugars react with each other, turning the steak brown on the outside and making it deeply flavorful and caramelized all over. So while searing might not seal in any of those juices, it's still going to make a heck of a difference to your finished steak. Seasoning a steak with salt is obviously an important step in helping to bring out its best flavor, but there's actually far more to it than just that. That's because salt also serves to tenderize the meat. Seasoning the outside of your steak draws out its water content. This moisture is then seasoned by the salt on the surface of the meat before it is eventually reabsorbed back into the steak, kind of like a dry brine. This process both tenderizes the meat and seasons it from the outside in. It's for this very reason that many experts recommend always seasoning grass-fed meat. Cuts from grass-fed animals tend to be tougher than corn or grain-fed meat and typically need at least 1 hour or more to sit with some salt before being cooked. The result will be a tasty, perfectly seasoned steak that also boasts a wonderful texture and no meat mallet necessary. If you thought you needed to cook your steak until it was gray inside to ensure it was safe to eat, well, you'd be wrong. Scientists from the University of Nottingham recently found that, on the contrary, rare meat is perfectly safe to eat, provided that clean utensils are used to prepare it. The study had scientists spike samples of raw meat with E. coli before cooking. It found that the bacteria only survived where the meat was recontaminated post-cooking with unwashed utensils that had been in contact with the raw meat. The rare pink center was perfectly safe to eat. Of course, while this finding holds well for single cuts of meat like steak, the same does not apply to burgers or other ground meat products, which should be cooked all the way through to prevent any chance of contracting a foodborne illness. Per the USDA, ground meat should be cooked to a minimum internal temperature of 160 degrees Fahrenheit to ensure it's safe to eat. Many steak recipes call for a flavorful marinade of some kind, often composed of ingredients such as garlic, onion, spices, or something far more outlandish.
How about your favorite food? What would that be?
Oh, milk steak.
What?
Milk steak.
I'm not putting milk
Just
steak.
put steak.
However, most marinades are actually pretty useless, adding little to no flavor to an already flavorful cut of meat. Even worse, some marinades can actually cause damage to meat, especially those that add a lot of acidity into the mix. The principle behind this is the same as that of using lemon juice to cook fish for ceviche. The acid denatures the proteins in the meat, making them overly tender or even mealy on the outside, without ever penetrating deeper within the cut. The result is meat that may indeed be flavorful, but won't have the texture you're looking for. Additionally, some marinades may burn in the pan and give your dish a genuinely nasty final flavor. If you are going to marinate meat, opt for marinades that are rich in herbs and use olive oil as a base, rather than those that rely on too much acidity like citrus, wine, or vinegar. Master grillers will often get a little irritated if you mess with the meat too much once it's cooking. They often claim that the only way to get a good sear is to leave it alone until the Maillard reaction can do its magic. And while it is indeed a good idea to let the surface of the steak take on some color before moving it, this doesn't have to be a one-and-done sort of operation. According to the Los Angeles Times, citing food scientist Harold McGee, more frequent flipping is actually a better way to cook the steak evenly. And no, you won't miss out on a perfectly charred exterior either. McGee tried turning his steak as frequently as every 5 seconds, though the LA Times dialed this back to a once-a-minute approach. The result? An evenly cooked center and a lovely brown crust, all without the worry of overdone or mangled steak. Or, in other words, sheer perfection. Check out one of our newest videos right here. Plus, even more mashed videos about the finest foods are coming soon. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the bell so you don't miss a single one.